We will do our best as Europeans to help mediate. French President Emmanuel Macron's words after becoming the first Western leader to meet face-to-face with exiled Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya since that contested election last month. Macron taking time out of a long-planned visit to Lithuania to answer her call to broker dialogue with Alexander Lukashenko. Lukashenko last week staged a secret inauguration for a sixth term. How does Macron deal with Lukashenko? How does he deal with his neighbor to the east, Vladimir Putin? Unfolding events have triggered strong statements from France and the European Union on Belarus and the poisoning of Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny. But will they go as far as, say, the UK and Canada, who this Tuesday announced sanctions? Does it end there? Do those calls for rule of law, by the way, carry when EU members Poland and Hungary shrug off warnings from Brussels on the matter? Macron, the first French president to visit Lithuania in 19 years, also visiting Latvia. Together, they're launching an EU-wide initiative to counter disinformation. What role for the French president? What role for former Soviet Baltic states, today turned staunch EU and NATO members? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Macron on Europe's Eastern Front, and joining us from Vilnius, Belarus-born researcher Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is at Vytautas Magnus University. Welcome back to the show. From Brussels, he is Poland's ex-foreign minister. Witold Wachowski is member of the European Parliament for the ruling Law and Justice Party. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation.
Andrei Kortunov is Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Thanks for joining us from Moscow.
Nice to be with you again.
And we want to welcome as well Anastasia Shapochkina, lecturer in geopolitics at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. How are you?
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, the French president leaving for Latvia after Lithuania, not before a visit, though, with French soldiers serving as part of a NATO battle group in the Lithuanian town of Rukla. This on a day where undoubtedly the highlight happened far from the press pool. Catherine Bennett has more.
It's the first time in 19 years that a French president has been in Lithuania on a bilateral visit. However, it's not Lithuania, but Belarus that is at the heart of discussions. In a meeting with exiled Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Macron said that France would continue to offer its support to the pro-democracy movement.
A lot of people are suffering because of this regime. People are in jails, and he will do everything to release all the.
But it's a delicate balancing act for the French president, wanting to help Belarus while unwilling to provoke Moscow's anger.
Notre vision des choses est que si nous voulons construire la paix durablement sur le continent européen, il nous faut travailler avec la Russie. Car nous partageons une histoire et une géographie.
Russian leader Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, has reiterated his support for Alexander Lukashenko.
Сейчас, с учетом той непростой ситуации, в которой оказалась Республика Беларусь, в том числе в условиях беспрецедентного внешнего давления после президентских выборов, хотел бы еще раз повторить: отношения России и Белоруссии не подвержены ни времени, ни конъюнктуре, имеют под собой прочный фундамент.
And for the moment, France is acting alone. The European Union, while condemning the violence, has failed to impose sanctions. Macron has called for the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe to take over mediation in the conflict.
Let me begin with you, Tatiana Shulitskaya. What do you make of Emmanuel Macron's statements that you just heard in that report?
It's indeed a very difficult situation because nowadays we see that European Union also making statements on Belarusian situation, but they indeed were not able to make sanctions. I mean, to adopt at least this step. So when it comes to President Macron, it's actually a very important step for internal Belarusian developments. And as we saw today, there have already been reaction from German sides. So today, at least Belarusian media, they announced that Angela Merkel is most probably going to meet with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya next week. So this reaction and action of President Macron is important because they are also provoking this, international reaction and reaction of Germany. However, as it was mentioned, a real challenge is position of President Putin, because President Putin himself, he has a plan how to deal with Belarusian situation, and this is not the plan of negotiations, but the plan to conduct so-called constitutional reforms in Belarus. So he and President Lukashenko himself, they do not accept any negotiation tracks or any attempts to make these negotiations, with participation of European Union possible.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, what Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is asking for is somebody to help broker so that Belarus's opposition can be at the bargaining table with Lukashenko, which is not the case right now.
Yes, exactly. You are totally right. Because up till now, President Lukashenko, he is just rejecting any negotiations. He is saying that he has his plan for constitutional reforms and they could be implemented, and any negotiations which could be conducted, they could be conducted with the so-called pro-governmental organizations. In Belarus there are pro-Soviet types, Belarusian Youth Union, Belarusian Women Union, and so on and so forth. So Lukashenko is still thinking that he could imitate negotiations with society, and that's why he is rejecting any attempts of any negotiations with opposition. So in principle, he does not accept Belarusian opposition, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Coordination Council, or any other politicians as an actor, or as a subject of negotiations with whom he could talk to.
Andrei Kortunov, you heard in that report the French president saying we have to keep the dialogues channels open with Moscow, and you heard the Russian president saying that he doesn't approve of any outside interference. Should we be reading something between the lines in what we heard from Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think that the perception of Vladimir Putin, to the extent I can guess what his perception is that basically Lukashenko is gaining ground right now because the power apparatus is still loyal to Lukashenko. And arguably, Putin believes that time is playing on Lukashenko's side. I also think that Putin does not see any particular role for the European Union in managing this conflict. First of all, because he doesn't trust the European Union. I think that he still remembers what happened in Ukraine when European leaders, some European representatives, let me put it this way, tried to negotiate a compromise between former President Yanukovych and the political opposition. Unfortunately, this compromise lasted for, I think, 1 or 2 days, not more than that. And second, I think that Putin believes that there is very little leverage that the European Union has in this particular situation. I think that he understands that Lukashenko is not a person who would accept a European mediation. And just look at the exchange between Lukashenko and Macron. If you want to be a mediator, you should be accepted by both sides. And when you talk to Tikhanovskaya, you are preaching to the choir. It's much more difficult to get access to Lukashenko, and I'm not sure that Macron will be able to do that.
Before I turn to Witold Waszkowski, let me first turn to the Ukrainian in the room. Anastasia Shapochkina, yeah, there's the specter of what happened in 2014. Did the EU lose its street cred back then?
I do not think that the EU lost entirely its credibility in 2014. Maybe the expectations from the EU were greater than the outcome. However, the EU did stand by the eventual new president of Ukraine, supported Poroshenko when it entered office. It especially signed and implemented the association agreement, the reason why the whole protests, over which the whole protests were triggered, and it also helped Ukraine accomplish very important steps toward the EU, which it had planned for a very long time, like, for example, abolishing the visas with Ukraine. So we cannot say, obviously, also financial help, consulting help, etc. We cannot say that the EU has failed entirely in Ukraine. The example with Yanukovych was probably a mistake, a diplomatic mistake by the EU to even engage in that particular negotiation, because they engaged with the losing side, but for very briefly. And once that side lost, they have changed and they engaged with the winning side, and they have been there in the long run. Of course, to say nothing of the EU support, also the civic society of Ukraine, NGOs and think tanks.
And to the second point, Witold Waszkowski, you heard there Andrei Kortunov saying that when the French president sits down with the head of Belarus's opposition, he's effectively preaching to the choir, not starting some kind of a mediation process.
No, first of all, we have to clarify some things. Like, please do not call Madam Tikhanovskaya as Tikhanovskaya, because she is not Russian. Please name Lukashenko as Lukashenko, not Lukashenko. Please do not say that President Macron is alone in his effort. He is late. He is reacting to the fake situation which was created by the fake election. 50 days, more than 50 days after the protests of the brave Belarusian people. Before Macron, a number of European countries, including Poland, already immediately reacted to the situation in Belarus. And Polish Prime Minister immediately announced the plan to support Belarusian opposition. We opened the borders for those who were treated in Belarus by security services. We opened our medical services. We opened our job market for them. And we created a special fund to support opposition, free media, and free NGOs. So there are a number of countries, including, as I said, Poland, Lithuania, and a few others who are reacted immediately. So the action of President Macron is too late right now.
And to the point that Andrei Kortunov made, that Vladimir Putin thinks that time is effectively on Lukashenko's side.
Yes, of course. I think that we are still can face the situation of Tiananmen Square in Belarus. Lukashenko is strong. He is ruling this country for more than 26 years. He educated the huge elite in this country, which is supporting the regime. He's got the support of Russia. We have to think. We have to face some kind of a hybrid intervention of Russian in Belarus, secret services, military services, even the media, Russian media, which are running right now the Belarusian media. So we have to face the fact that Russians are interfering through the hybrid instruments in the situation in Minsk, in Belarus. yes, so we have to create a strong reaction of the European Union, and I do not count on President Macron decisions or efforts. We created last year, according to the Ursula von der Leyen, so-called geopolitical commission, and we expect that this geopolitical commission will take a position on the crisis which is going on right now in Belarus.
All right, when we come back, we're going to pick up on that point and look at whether or not targeted sanctions will follow when there's that EU summit that comes up on Thursday in Brussels. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking on the day when the UK and Canada have slapped targeted sanctions on top officials in Belarus, and Emmanuel Macron became the first Western leader to meet with opposition candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. It happened on the sidelines of a long-planned trip to Lithuania. Macron, who's moved on to Latvia. We're talking about it with Belarus-born researcher Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who's with us from Vilnius. Welcome back as well from Brussels. Poland's ex-foreign minister Witold Wachkowski is with us from Moscow. Andrei Kortunov joins us. Andrei Kortunov, Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. And here in the studios, we welcome back Anastasia Shapochkina, who not only lectures at Sciences Po, but what is you're now the founder of the Eastern Circles Geopolitics Club.
Yes.
And your first talk will be on?
Belarus.
Okay. By the way, we were talking just before the break about time perhaps being on Vladimir Putin's side. Tatyana Chulitskaya, we've learned in the past hour that Belarus is suspending major media outlet TUT.by, which I know is how many inside the country were getting their news, not watching state television. How big a blow is that?
It's like Tutbai is not the first media which is suffering from repressions during this post-electoral period. So already in August, there were at least 22 websites and media resources, and nowadays there are even more of them, which are restricted in Belarus. However, I should mention that nowadays the main source of information in Belarus is, as paradoxically as it may sound, is Telegram channels, of all this media and of other media. And also people create their own communication channels and spreading news. So from the point of view of internal communication, of course, any restrictions on media, they are terrible and they make harm. However, I should say that Belarusians would not leave without, they would not be left without sources, trustable sources of information. But of course, international reactions towards these restrictions on media, it should be made. All media international organizations, they should react on this situation. And also, of course, from the point of view of accessibility of media resources, it's anyway a harmful step because general public in Belarus, those who are not profound enough to communicate through Telegram or to create VPN connection, special type of connection to internet, they still will suffer from lacking the resources like Tutbay. But I should also say that previously Tutbay has already functioned without this media license, so it was functioning as a website, not a news resources. So most probably it will continue as just website, not news resources. So it's not totally blocked, but its status as a media is suspended.
Let me ask you on the other side, how much of a pinch will Lukashenko and his entourage feel from those targeted sanctions announced by the UK and Canada?
Lukashenko is really irritated by any sanctions, which are taken by Baltic states up till now, and by by this symbolic, non-recognition, which is made by many countries up till now. So, from the point of view of Lukashenko's reaction towards any sanctions, it would be negative. He's he's quite irritated with any steps of any government, especially of the Western governments, and he always represents the sanctions as an external interference in national politics of Belarus. So from the point of view of international reactions, these sanctions, they definitely make sense because Lukashenko and his government, they feel that they are in the focus, and that they could not just do things to conduct their business as usual. So these sanctions are, in my opinion, very important.
All right. On Monday, the Polish foreign minister, the successor, if you will, to Witold Waszkowski, was in Budapest, and while he said it was up to Belarus to choose its own future course, he did talk up the prospect of those sanctions.
Gdyby nie doszło do wprowadzenia takich sankcji, mówimy o sankcjach wymierzonych w poszczególnych funkcjonariuszy państwa białoruskiego, to kraje naszego regionu rozważą, myślę o sąsiadach Białorusi należących do Unii Europejskiej, wprowadzenie sankcji narodowych, ale mamy nadzieję, że konsensus tutaj dość szybko będzie osiągnięty na forum unijnym.
So the prospect perhaps of national sanctions. Anna Shapochkina, how would that make the EU look?
Of course, the lack of a common stance again in this situation is a witness of the lack of EU unity, and it's not as powerful even if the whole of Central European states and the Baltic states impose their own sanctions. This doesn't at all compare to the punch that could have been delivered if France and Germany were in the game as the European leaders of today, and if they managed to rally other countries to impose EU-wide sanctions. Just before presidential elections, in fact, Lukashenko himself gave ideas as to what those sanctions, effective sanctions, could be. And he gave these ideas in an interview he gave to a Ukrainian journalist, Gordon, which was meant as a pre-election kind of campaign interview. It was very long and very interesting. He there brought up an example of the Belarus recognition of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, after the Russian interference in Georgia in 2008. And there was this question of, will Belarus recognize it or not? And it was an important question because other post-Soviet states would look to Lukashenko for the guidance, basically. If he would recognize it, others would be under pressure from Moscow to do the same, and if not, they could be relieved a little bit of this pressure. And what Lukashenko said what happened was that Javier Solana arrived to Belarus and visited him.
The EU's foreign policy chief at the time.
And it wasn't something which was very widely mediatized. It was done, this visit, and he said he came to me to talk about the recognition of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and he pulled out a list of things that the EU is going to do to Belarus. And he said, if you recognize them, this is what's going to happen to you. He only named one item on the list. He said, for example, you are going to be disconnected from the SWIFT system, the bank system, which of course would be extremely dramatic, would have dramatic consequences for the Belarusian economy. He then left. There were other items which Lukashenko did not name. And then Lukashenko was invited to Moscow to then talk with then President Medvedev about the same subject. And when Medvedev asked him to back the independence of to recognize the two so to say states, the Belarusian president had something to answer. And this was an example of the power of European diplomacy. Europe has something to do. It has a power to yield. Whether it wants to yield it or not is a different question. Undoubtedly, it cannot be yielded by Lithuania alone. It has to be yielded by the bloc led by France and Germany, as it is led by France and Germany on other issues. Then the leadership in this diplomatic affair of the countries from Central European countries and the Baltic states is admirable, but it is insufficient in order to really yield pressure on Lukashenko. And then there is, of course, the totally different question is whether Lukashenko is susceptible to this pressure and whether this pressure is going to yield results.
Andrei Kortunov, you're sitting in Moscow, seen from there. Again, how much clout does the European Union have? The European Union, which has sanctioned Russia over its annexation of Crimea and the fighting that's taking place in the east of Ukraine.
Well, as far as EU sanctions are concerned, I think that in the Kremlin, their concern is not the European sanctions per se, but rather that Europeans might yield to Americans, because the US sanctions are much more rigid than the sanctions of the European Union. And the Nord Stream 2 project is one of the illustrations of this very difficult situation for the European Union. However, in terms of Belarus, I think that more rigid sanctions on Belarus would definitely increase the Belarusian dependence on Moscow. Because what Lukashenko will do, he will come up to Putin and say, look, folk, now I am under sanctions because I stay loyal to Russia, and you have to compensate me for these sanctions. I don't think that the European Union will go as far as to exclude the Belarusian state from SWIFT, because that would be detrimental to the financial system globally, and I don't think it will happen. But definitely, Lukashenko will try to use European sanctions as yet another bargaining chip in dealing with Moscow. How Moscow reacts, how much it will compensate Lukashenko for even more difficult economic situation that he will put his country to, it's not clear. But some compensation will follow.
Witold Wachkowski, let me ask you about that statement we heard earlier from the Polish foreign minister. How much clout does it carry? Because we're in a week now where there's going to be a European summit where Poland's going to be under scrutiny. On Wednesday, a report comes out over rule of law inside of Poland. Can Poland ask for rule of law in Belarus when it's on the back foot with its own EU partners for the questions concerning things like the judiciary and the freedom of the press at home?
Well, we are talking about things which are not covered by the European law. The rule of law is not part of acquis communautaire in the European Union. So you are referring to the decisions or efforts by some European institutions like the commissions, which are not based on the European law. This is an ideological war against countries, against governments, like government in Poland, the government in Hungary. So it has nothing to do with reality. Some opinions, some decisions of the European Parliament against Poland are based on fake news about situation doesn't exist in Poland.
At the last EU summit, there was that agreement that there would be this historic borrowing kickstart the economy of Europe after the COVID crisis, 750 billion euros. And one of the conditionalities was, and that's what this summit's going to be about on Thursday, is a rule of law is going to be part of the bargain.
And where is the definition of rule of law in the European Union? There is no definition of rule of law. There is no definition in any legally binding document of the European Union. So we cannot be charged that we violated anything. That's one thing. The second problem is that, once again, President Macron is one of the last European leader who is reacting to the situation in Belarus. One of the first was a Polish leader, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, who a few days after the fake election in Belarus, immediately introduced the Polish plan to support Belarusian opposition, to support those who were persecuted and injured. And of course, the Polish Prime Minister is going to introduce during the next summit of the European Union the so-called European Marshall Plan to support Belarus. So we are doing our homework to support the changes, positive and democratic changes in Belarus, because these changes will affect, negative changes will affect not only Poland, but also the security situation in Europe. So we very much appreciate that finally President Macron, after 50 days of protest in Minsk, decided to join and support and help our efforts to help the Belarusian opposition.
Anastasia Shapochkina, again, let me ask you about the optics of this. Is there a disconnect between Poland's call for rule of law in Belarus and the situation inside of Poland as it will be presented Thursday at that EU summit?
Indeed, to go back to Witold Wachkowski's words, indeed, Poland has stepped up to signify, to show its support for the Belarusian opposition leader very early on. It also has housed and welcomed several very prominent opposition figures in Poland, as Lithuania has done. However, and of course there is a large Belarusian community in Poland. However, also what is its own democratic kind of stance, the judiciary reforms, the media situation in Poland, which is also difficult, are positioning Poland in a precarious position because it's kind of
who leads the charge then? Who leads the charge when it comes to pressuring Belarus? Is it?
It is difficult to say that Poland is leading the charge, especially also since 2016, having made a political choice to restart the dialogue with Lukashenko very intensely about economic cooperation, that connection with the Belarusian opposition has kind of also gone down the drain, which was picked up by Lithuania. And thus, Macron, when he went to meet with the opposition leader of Belarus, he went to Lithuania. It is, of course, historically, it's both Poland and Lithuania when they were Commonwealth. That's when Belarus what today is Belarus was basically part of this Commonwealth. And however, it was Lithuania which managed to lead that, to continue that relationship, to take that lead, to welcome the key opposition person for the West, and now to develop this potential.
And that brings us to something important which we shouldn't overlook, which is, this was Tatiana Chulitskaya, a long-planned trip by the French president to Lithuania and Latvia. It was planned a long time ago. In fact, they unveiled during the trip the launch of this initiative to counter disinformation. What's the view? Because I see that there's a consensus on this panel that when it comes to the Belarus question proper, the French are late to the game. But overall, how's it being viewed, the fact that here he is, a French president for the first time in 19 years in Vilnius?
Yes, I mean, from the point of view of organization of this visit and of conduction of this visit, of course, this meeting with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was quite a surprise for, all of us researchers and all of us political analysts here. This intervention of Belarusian agenda is quite an unexpected one. Also, Belarusian team of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, in my knowledge, was more than satisfied. That it's understandable that they are satisfied with it. However, I think that it's also attempts of Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs that they really want to have France, as a supporter of their general line of dealing with Belarus and dealing with Belarusian profile, because from the point of view
Tatiana, do you have the sense that Emmanuel Macron has a plan, a strategy when it comes to the geopolitics of the Baltic states next to Russia, next to Belarus, or that this is a bit of headline grabbing?
I'd rather say that it's a bit of headline grabbing, because we know that President Macron has a special idea about this new security architecture in Europe and how to deal with Russia, and part of this strategy is attempt to reestablish this negotiations or reestablish communicative space between Russia and Baltic state in particular. In my opinion, it's not such a good idea, and not such a really functional idea. I should mention that Mr. Macron is not the first one who is trying to negotiate with Vladimir Putin, and frankly speaking, I doubt that he will be more successful than his predecessor. Sorry?
What do? Macron shouldn't be speaking to the Russians? He shouldn't keep the channel open, is what you're suggesting?
No, I would not say so, but it's quite strange that he is proposing to to reopen this communicative channel for Baltic states. To make such proposals, there should be a more comprehensive strategy by President Macron, because nowadays it's just attempt to say that you should communicate with Russia, but how, on what, which positions, still quite unclear.
Let me bring in Andrei Kortunov on this.
We still need to see concrete points for this communication.
Let me bring in Andrei Kortunov on this. So it seems unclear there. You heard to Tatiana Chulitskaya the strategy or the grand plan of Emmanuel Macron. The French press characterizing it as his idea of getting a small group of member states of the EU energized on an issue, and from that trying to build a consensus. We saw that he recently had a summit of Southern European countries where it was devoted mostly to the migration question. In this case, visiting Lithuania and Latvia ahead of that EU summit. What do they make in Moscow of Emmanuel Macron, the guy who welcomed Vladimir Putin to his country house this summer?
Well, I think that in Moscow they appreciate the position of the French president to have more contacts. I think the perception is that more communication lines are not necessarily a kind of unilateral step, or it's not a favor. It's not something that Russia should earn. It's natural. The more communication we have, the better it is. However, I think that there is a certain skepticism about the rhetoric of President Macron because his ideas are quite general and quite vague. There are some specific issues where probably we could restart a dialogue without compromising the principles. For example, one can say that we need a better meal-to-meal dialogue within the NATO-Russia Council, which we do not have right now. We can do more, not in trying to breach disagreements between Putin and European leaders, but in order to manage this confrontation, to reduce the costs of this confrontation, and to reduce the risks of this confrontation, which is likely to be with us, unfortunately, for quite a long time.
Witold Wachowski, we're almost out of time. In 30 seconds, you agree with Andrei Kortunov?
I can agree that Russia is an important country, shouldn't be neglected and supposed to be part of our dialogue. But we cannot accept the situation that Russia is creating problems and then is part of the solution of these problems. We cannot come back to the situation of 19th century Europe, which was run by the concert of powers. That's a dream of Russia, to come back to this situation. I'm afraid that talking this way by President Macron is actually stepping up this initiative or this dream of Russia to replace the instrument we have right now created by the European Union, like Commission, like external service, and to bypass these institutions and to talk directly with only few countries to try to solve the problems in Europe.
Right, you're against that
we cannot
issue.
accept this situation.
We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Witold Wachowski, for joining us from Brussels, Andrei Kortunov in Moscow, Tatiana Chulitskaya for being with us from the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius. I also want to thank Anastasia Shapochkina for being with us here in the studios. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.